should have 3 losses by now.
I don't know about that.
They are not that good.
Put Florida State in there, I would say yes to that, what you just said.
Return by Caleb Downs, and he finds a seam. He makes the punter look silly. Caleb Downs, show him what you got. Touchdown, Bama.
5-minute drive now for UTEP. And they will keep it on the ground. Awad just gets pile-driven by Stutzman.
Really haven't even tried from the shotgun.
That throw's intercepted. Pierce down the sideline. Touchdown.
Claiborne, the sophomore, has 1 score so far this season. Griffiths will buy a little bit of time. Falling down, lost the football. Play is still live. And recovered by the Monarchs. Lamarian James will take it the other way for the ODU touchdown.
Welcome back to Devy IDP Grind. I'm your host, Hollywood Titan. Unfortunately, my co-host, Justice, is unable to make it tonight. He's going out of town. But I do have a guest with me, Katie Harper of the Daily News Record, and she is here to discuss some James Madison defense with us. How you doing, Katie?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. As you know, we focus solely on the defensive side of the ball, so we got some questions about, some players that you think are stepping up. We're going to cover some players maybe that's taking over a new role and maybe some recruiting questions for you. So we won't keep you too long, but thank you so much for joining us. You're a James Madison alum, and you cover JMU football, baseball for the Daily News Record. And if you're wondering, she can be found on X at Katie Harper. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, I kind of mentioned some of it. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you interested in sports and sports media journalism, and how long you've been covering JMU athletics?
Yeah, so I found my way into sports pretty much early on in life. I always tell people that if you have a woman who loves sports, there's a really good chance that her mom did too, and that was the case for me. My mom is a diehard Philadelphia sports fan, and she passed that love on to me. My dad is a Tennessee alum, so he passed the college sports love on to me as well. And just growing up with them, Friday, Saturday, Sundays in the fall, it was football every single day. And I think when I got into high school, I started taking journalism classes, and that was when I realized that going into covering sports was something that was a possibility. And that took me to JMU. My freshman year at JMU was 2016 when they won the FCS national title for the second time. So that was a pretty good first year. And I think also that was kind of when I really started to appreciate defense more for football, just because for anybody who knows about JMU, the start of the 2016 season, their defense was not what they were known for. They were a very offensive team under Everett Withers the year before, and under Mike Houston, it really got better and better and better. And since then, it's been pretty much a solid defense. So I started covering them loosely during my sophomore year of college, and then full-time for our student paper in 2018 and 2019. So I went to the national championship game in 2019 that they lost to North Dakota State during Kurt Signetti's first year. Then I graduated in 2020, worked in newspaper design for a few years, and then I was back at covering the team for the DNR back in November of 2023. It was my first month on the job. My first week was the game day game against App State, so it was a nice crazy one, but I've been around this program for a while now, so it's definitely one that at times I can find myself trailing off and chatting a lot about.
Awesome. So it sounds like you got spoiled a little early with the success from JMU.
Absolutely.
So those of us who are not familiar with James Madison, how would you describe their defensive style or scheme?
I think this year it's going to be an interesting one since they're going to be under Colin Hitchler for the first year. Last year they played under Lyle Hemphill and they were lights out pretty much every single game, led the country in interceptions, and that turnover margin was just unreal, obviously with help from the offense as well in that. But just from chatting with some of the players this year, the spring was really getting to know Hitchler and kind of what he was bringing from him. He has a really good track record, knows Bob Chesney and the coaching staff, was at Alabama last year. And from what we were told by some of the players, it's not too different from what they were running last year with Hemphill, but Trent Hendrick, who he's entering his senior season at JMU, he said it's actually pretty similar to what he was used to under Bryant Haynes, who's now at Indiana with Curt Cignetti during his first 2 years. So they really relied heavily on a 4-2 under Haynes. So I really think that nickel defense is going to be present again this year. And even last year under Hemphill, they used their nickels quite a bit in mix with how many linebackers they put on the field. So I think that 4-2-5 is kind of going to be what is the bread and butter for this team moving forward, especially when you look at what they have available to them.
Right. We'll get to Hitchler here in just a second. What's been the biggest difference in the change from Curt Cignetti to Bob Chesney as the head coach that you've seen so far?
I think a lot of that just stems to kind of the energy around the program and the practices. And I always tell people it's not to say that Curt Cignetti did it the wrong way, Chesney does it the right way, because obviously Curt Cignetti has been very successful wherever he goes, and he's won at programs that haven't historically won. I think you can exclude JMU from that because they had a winning culture before he got here. But at Elon, he turned it into a winning program. Everybody has seen what he's done at Indiana. But he's very much an old school coach. You can tell he coached with Nick Saban, and you can kind of see that trickle down into him. And then Chesney, he's kind of that quintessential younger coach now where everything's a little bit louder at practice. The music is going nonstop. We actually, me and some of the other media members back in probably February, got a chance to go to one of their weight room sessions with their new weight room or strength coach. And it was loud. I think my ears were ringing for hours after it. We had a DJ in there, and it was just a much more up-tempo, loose, but still very productive in the way. So I think that's kind of been the biggest change, is just the overall energy around the program. And again, it's not to say it's better than what it was. I think it's just different, and it works for different coaches.
Right. You mentioned Colin Hitchler there a minute ago. He's their new defensive coordinator in 2025. How do you think this is going to impact this defense's playing style that we've grown accustomed to seeing in Harrisonburg?
I really don't think it's going to hurt it at all. I think if anything, it may, make it a little bit better because it brings in a new mindset to it. But I think something that JMU has done really well has it been adapting to different coaches, because as fans have seen over the last several years, it can be a revolving door of coaches at times and a stepping stone, just like it can be for players. It can be that for coaches. So they've had different defensive coordinators multiple times through the last decade. And still with that, they've been pretty much a lights out defense since that 2016 season that I talked about earlier. So, I mean, you're going on, 8-9 years of just strong defenses that I think Hitchler, given what his background is and making stops at some really big schools, I think it's just one that's going to keep this defense rolling. And I think for me, one of the things that I want to see is how much maybe the turnovers change a little bit, because that was a big emphasis from Hemphill. I think every defensive coordinator still wants it to be a big focus no matter what. But I think at times last year we saw that the defense was more focused on not giving up the big play. And sometimes that can lead to more turnovers. And that also let the run defense not falter, but teams rushed against JMU a little bit more than teams had in previous years. So that's kind of going to be the two areas that I really focus in on over the first couple of weeks that Hitchler is kind of in control of the defense.
Right. And that was one of my questions or curiosities, is y'all had such a good run defensively for so long. Him coming in, was there any concern that maybe they would be a let up? It sounds like you're pretty confident that he's going to be able to keep this defensive dominance trend going.
Yeah, I think I'm curious to see if switching to a more nickel defensive front kind of helps them with the run game, because again, Hemphill really just they wanted to keep the big plays out. So you didn't see a lot of these like 60-yard passes down the field to put
Right.
teams in red zones, but you saw them running against the ball or running against them easier than they had been. One of my favorite stats over the last several years since I kind of started following the team was how many years did the season end with teams averaging over 100 yards rushing per game, and it was like 1 or 2 seasons in the last 10 years. And then this past year teams did rush for over 100 yards against them on average, but they were still one of the best run defenses in the Sun Belt. So it was one of those give and take a little bit. But I think Hitchler, with kind of maybe the return a little bit to what Bryant Haynes ran a couple of years ago, I think that's going to be the one area where I think they may actually get just a little bit better. But I think a lot of that too depends on what Chesney really wants to stress, if he still wants to kind of limit that big play as well.
Yeah, running that bigger nickel set should help you a lot. Looking at the defensive line, they lose some key pieces: Eric O'Neill, Kari Mans. How do the Dukes go about replacing their production? And is there someone that you see is ready to take their game to the next level for the defensive line this year?
Yeah, those are 2 names that are they can be probably a little daunting to try and replace. I think when you look at someone like Eric O'Neill, especially, I mean, he came from Long Island University, so he was someone that they kind of found this diamond in a rough. And so if you're a fan or if you're the coaches, you hope that you can do it again and you can replicate it and find someone else that kind of like him comes out of nowhere. I think they've pulled in some guys that are really good. Xavier Holmes is a good defensive end, similar to Kyrie Mans. He's coming from Maine. Obviously, Mans had a stop at Colorado first, but Holmes and Mans are actually friends and they've played together before. And Xavier Holmes had told us back in the spring that watching Mans do what he did at JMU last year was one of the reasons that he wanted to come join the defense. And so I think he's someone that can really provide that good experience, has played at the college level for several years now, and kind of lead that defensive end unit. One player that I'm kind of key on watching to see if he takes a step, and we talked to him after the spring game, is Sahir West. He's going to be a redshirt freshman. We like to joke in the press box that his first participation stat was when he got a penalty when he wasn't even playing in the game, and that was the first time he got participation all season. But he has a very good mindset about him. He was probably the one player that stood out the most to me during the spring game with his ability to get to the quarterback with the rules that the spring game brought. But he talked heavily about really leaning on O'Neill and Mans last year and learning from them. And so for him being so young, I think that's an exciting guy to potentially watch on the defensive end.
Awesome. I like that. So let's step back a little bit and go to the second level. Looking at linebackers, they lose 2 key cogs, Jacob Dobbs and Tarish Jones. But you have to be excited about the return of Trent Hendrick, right? The big question has to be who is ready to step up and join Hendrick in the starting lineup. And do you believe Hendrick will take his game to another level?
I've been big on Trent Hendrick for a while. I think we've seen it in the Sun Belt over the last several of years that it's a very good linebacker conference. And so I have kind of felt that he hasn't necessarily gotten the praise at times that he deserves. And a lot of that last year comes down to he's playing with Jacob Dobbs, who jumped into the FBS and was already expected to be a star linebacker for JMU. I think he has really embraced this new role now of being kind of the quarterback of the defense. Throughout the spring, he was the one that was wearing the coach-to-player helmet communication, and I think he's going to handle that role very, very well. And after the spring ended and the portal was opening up, the biggest question mark I had, and I think a lot of fans had too, was who can fill in next to him? Because I don't think there's much concern about Trent at all. I think he will continue to get better as a true senior now. But they did. They went out to the portal and they brought in Drew Spinagati, who was at Holy Cross with Bob Chesney before and has produced good numbers. So I think he's someone that can also just kind of settle that down. And then they also added a really young guy in Jaden Studio, who's another one that I think has some potential moving forward. But I think, now in mid-June, that position group is a lot better than what it was just even like 2-3 months ago.
Right. Yeah, and having that familiarity coming over will definitely help them there. So, losing the Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist Terrence Spence at cornerback leaves a big hole in your all secondary. Who do you think is up to the challenge to be the next great JMU corner? And at safety, it has to feel good that you have Jacob Thomas returning, right? He was a monster for y'all last year. What are your expectations for Thomas in 25? And is there anybody else in the secondary that we need to know about? Spence, he was just a monster for you. And at times, he was really kind of shutting things down out there on his side of the field.
Yeah, Spence really had the right approach. He was always very calm when you talk to him, and he saw the game. It almost looked like the way he played was that he saw the game in slow motion with how he was able to position himself. So that's a loss that obviously hurts. And then, for a while in the spring, it looked like Chauncey Logan was going to be the option at cornerback 1. He transferred after the spring season. He's now at Memphis. But throughout the spring, Bob Chesney was very high on Mekhi Rogers, who's coming in from St. Francis, and he had been at the D3 level before that. And he's a tall kid. He's built like a corner. And I think Chesney kept saying that, he thought he was going to see Mekhi Rogers keep playing eventually even past this year. And it was going to go into Sundays because that's how big he is on this corner. And he's one of those kids that COVID kind of affected his recruitment coming out of high school. Wasn't getting a ton of attention because of what was going on in the world at that time. So I think people are starting to see it now as he keeps getting more and more chances. So I think he's someone that's going to be really good. And then I think Chance Harley, who's coming in from Maryland, has been at the bigger schools, just hasn't had a ton of opportunity to get on the field. But he's someone that even just watching him at practice, very focused. Before practice even starts, he's out on the field juggling to work on, hand-eye coordination. And he's someone that I think his focus is really going to help him step into a probably bigger role now that they're looking at a defense that doesn't have Chauncey Logan on the roster. And then Jacob Thomas, yeah, he's I think a dream safety for some of these coaches. I know him and the safeties coach, Anthony DeMichael, have a really good relationship. And he's someone that has been at the program. It's going to be his true senior year, just like Trent Hendrick. They've just kind of been focal points. He had to work to get a scholarship. He didn't come to JMU originally on scholarship under Signetti, and he eventually got there. And he's just kind of become that one reliable player. I think I've seen Jacob Thomas run down multiple players and make shoelace tackles multiple times to just save a touchdown. So I think he's going to be really, really good in the secondary. And then just kind of mixed with him, the cornerbacks, and can maybe do it all at nickel too, is DJ Barksdale. He's a small kid. He's only like 5'9", but he's one of those guys that plays a lot bigger than he is. And I think last year we saw him do it all at times. He would blitz, he would drop back. Against UNC, they had him, covering Bryson Nesbitt at times. And it was a severe mismatch size-wise, but he really learned from that one. And he was only a sophomore too. And I think he's someone by the end of the season, and everybody was like, you know what? He's going to be a guy moving forward that is going to just kind of run this defense and do whatever he needs to do.
Awesome. If you had to pick a defensive player or two to have a breakout season in 2025, who would that be?
I think I told someone recently, Trent Hendrick on a national level, kind of what I had mentioned earlier, is that he's gotten the recognition from JMU fans, but I don't think he's gotten it from the larger crowd like he deserves. And I think the same thing can be said about DJ Barksdale as well. But I don't know. It's such a good defense right now, and it's a lot of guys who have proven their worth at lower levels maybe. So I may go Mekhi Rogers just because he's shown what he can do at the FCS level, but I think it's going to be a chance for him to really break out at the FBS level.
Right. Are there any younger guys or freshmen that you haven't talked about already that you think will make an impact for this season?
I think really when you look at it, Sahir West may be the only one that has not necessarily a clear path to the field, but maybe just a little bit of an easier one, just with kind of the returners and what they have at defensive end. But it is a group right now that got very, very experienced over the spring portal window, and the coaches made sure that they didn't necessarily have any young players that were going to need to be relied on heavily early. So I would say that probably the two I talked about the most would be Sahir West and Jaden Studio, just being younger options that could come in and maybe see some playing time if things aren't going well with some of the experienced players that they brought in.
Awesome. With the state of college football now, which is, as we all know, is completely crazy with the NIL and the portal, is there anybody that maybe JMU's looking to bring in? How has the NIL kind of affected the transfer portal for you guys? Are you seeing a lot exit? Is it more coming in? How has those two impacted the team?
It's been a mix. I wouldn't say there's anybody necessarily coming in that's, looking for that payday. And it's mainly just because JMU doesn't have the money to give out to all of these players. Someone like an Eric O'Neill, obviously JMU would have loved to be able to keep him, but he proved his worth and proved that he would be able to go get paid. And so he obviously left with that. But, I think they still have some guys that have really bought into the program who want to be here. And have mentioned both of them already, with Trent Hendrick and Jacob Thomas playing out their career. And, they didn't look too much at the portal. I'm not 100% sure of how much they looked after Signetti left, but it's one of those coming in. Yeah, they've brought in a lot of FCS guys who will probably get a little bit more than they would have gotten at the FCS level, but it's definitely not like, some of these guys going out and signing $1 million contracts to return for a year, which is, I think for all of us who grew up watching college football, it's really weird to see, headlines that say blah, 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 reached an agreement to return for another season. Like that's not what it was 5 years ago. But I think they've worked it really well. And media members, we've talked to Chesney multiple times, and we talked to him a few weeks ago about NIL and how much it comes up nowadays in conversations. And for him, he said, obviously, if agents get brought up, money is going to get brought up, and it does get brought up. But for him, he's saying it's not actually a conversation that he has with players as much as maybe people would expect it to be. And on top of that, if the player is asking about money right away, Chesney has told us, hey, that's probably not a guy that we want on our roster. It's going to work out with. That's not the kind of player we're looking for. We want them to be motivated to play because they love the game, not because they want the paycheck. And so I think with that, they've done a really good job of, finding guys who want to come up from the FCS and have a chance at the FBS level, improve themselves. And I know I've talked with some of the other reporters that cover the team. You look around at some of the other group of 5 teams, and they like to go out and get guys from, the Michigans, the Ohio States that haven't gotten playing time. So they're a little bit unproven. And JMU's approach has really been, let's go get guys who we can afford, but they also have it on tape that they've been able to compete at the college level already. And I think, again, not saying one way's right and one way's wrong, because depending on the coach, they can make it work either way. But I think it's paid off for JMU to be able to find guys in the portal that they can afford NIL-wise and get them in the door.
Right. And I'm not against or opposed to players, getting their value, their worth. They have a right to get that living as good as anybody else. But it seems to be with some of the coaches that will speak out, you kind of mentioned it. When a player kind of mentions money or NIL first thing, that seems to be like a huge turnoff. I'm a huge Tennessee fan, so everybody knows about the whole Nico situation, and I think that was just me personally. I just think that was Tennessee's way of saying, we're we'll pay you, but we're not going to do this song and dance with everybody and every time. So I think you're hearing that more with coaches around the league. I think if they would admit it, I think they were so happy that Tennessee and Danny White did that and stood up, because I think it made it easier for them, right? Because somebody had to be the first one through the door. So, yeah. Looking at y'all's roster, you've got a lot of young talent, especially when you look at like linebackers. You've got a 4 or 5 there in the group. When you look at the secondary, you've got 5 or 6 there that are sophomore or less. Um, do you see, maybe not like as far as a major role, but do you see James Madison trying to uh, work these young guys in a little bit more, knowing that maybe 2026 is where they're really going to need them? You see them trying to work them in and get them ready there?
I think they're gonna. Bob Chesney loves rotating. I've never met a coach that loves rotating players as much as he does. And same, like I know, same with offensive line and defensive line. They will bring guys in at ease. So getting younger players involved is definitely going to happen. They don't like to play, hey, this is our first string, this is our second string, this is our third string. They're going to play guys that they think can make a play. And I think that's another thing you asked earlier about the difference between kind of Curt Cignetti and Bob Chesney. Curt Cignetti had his guys, and those are the guys that were on the field. And it can't fault him for it, because they were very successful and they won a lot of games that way. But with Chesney, you see it where, you are going to have multiple guys come in and get experience. And with the younger players, I think this year, when you look at the defense, you have really good experienced players around them that I think are great tools to use on the field to help them get better. When you can have, a Trent Hendrick lineup next to a Jaden Studio and help show him the game, that's going to benefit you in the next year as well. And same with Jacob Thomas. And I think last year, the defense really saw it with DJ Barksdale, of who I mentioned earlier. They let him learn early on when he's stepping out on the field as a 5'9" nickel, being told to cover, UNC's star tight end. And he told us after that game, he's like, was not my perfect game. I'm not happy with how I played. And Chesney said it at times too. He could tell that, DJ Barksdale was getting frustrated at times, that plays were given up by him. And from that point on, he just got better week in and week out. And he's someone that I think really benefited from being able to play and have a ton of playing time as a true sophomore, now to being a junior, where there is going to be a bigger emphasis on him and what he can do. And I mean, he ended the year as the defensive MVP at the Boca Raton Bowl for a reason. And that includes a game that had big plays from Eric O'Neal and Kyrie Mans, and he still got that vote. So I definitely think they're going to make sure that they get those younger guys on the field, mainly because, one, they love rotating, and two, just with the older guys that can help teach them and show them the way. That's something that I feel like a coach can't neglect to do, because it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Right. Is there a 2026 James Madison recruit or commitment on the defensive side that you're really excited about joining the program?
It's still kind of early on for them. They haven't gotten a ton in yet. One that I talked to last week, who I think is going to be good, is Josiah Perry. He's coming in as a linebacker. He played his first 3 years of high school at Massapequa in Virginia, and now is actually going to spend his senior year at this new performance academy that's opening up in Northern Virginia. But talking with his defensive coordinator at his new school, his defensive coordinator could not say enough good things about him. And he's like, listen, yes, he's a good player. I saw his film when we were trying to decide on what kids we wanted to bring in. But he's like, the thing that I really noticed about him first was who he was as a person. He's like, great family, puts his head down and works, and wants to make sure that he's getting better every single step and every single day. And so he's one that I think I'm excited to see in 2026, especially when you look at, someone like Trent Hendrick, who will graduate at the end of this season, at the end of the year. So a young linebacker who comes with coaches that are very big on him already. I think that's an exciting one that I'm really looking forward to in the next year.
Awesome. So you all were 9-4 last year, 4-4 in the Sun Belt. Unfortunately, you had losses to ULM and Georgia Southern, App State, and Marshall. Do you feel like the team kind of lost a little bit of steam down the stretch with the two losses to App State and Marshall? I know App State was on the road, but until that point, especially coming off the year before, right, when you had such a historic season, what do you think was the big difference between those two? Was it the talent? Was it the change in coaching? What do you feel was the issue that y'all took just a little bit of a step back?
Yeah, it was definitely, I know a lot of JMU fans, they're so passionate. They love this team. They want to see them be the CFP representative out of the G5 every single year. And, the way the season started, the offense wasn't necessarily clicking early. And then they have that breakout against UNC. And so people are thinking it's getting better. It's getting better. The loss to ULM, I think, had a lot of people very angry, and I can understand why. ULM ends up not making a bowl game. I will say, after sitting at Sunbelt Media Day last year, I, as a journalist, would have run through a wall for Bryant Vincent, their new head coach. So I think he kind of really got that team in the right place for that moment to beat JMU down in Louisiana, not an easy school to get to. Even JMU was not an easy school to get to necessarily. So for them to get down there was difficult. So I think it was a hard game with that. But then running into the App State and the Marshall game, the injuries at that point were definitely starting to pile up. You're losing Jacob Dobbs. You're losing Ray Scott at linebacker. On the offensive side, Alonzo Barnett, we think now is maybe a little bit more banged up than he let on during the season. And it was one of those that it almost was like they took a pin to a balloon during the second quarter of both of those games, where they raced out to this great start and then everything, one thing would go wrong and then it's spiraling and they didn't really grasp it again. So I think for the guys on this team who were returning from that, obviously ending the year with the bowl victory was a massive, plus and an exclamation point to get the first one in program history. But I think there is still some lingering anger with kind of how that season played out, because it was the first year that they could have played for the Sun Belt title after in a way maybe potentially winning it the first 2 years that they were in the conference, because they had the best record, they just couldn't play for it. So I think that one definitely hurt some guys, and it lingered. And I've talked to Jacob Dobbs now a few times since he graduated, and he is firm in saying those guys, they're going to be back, they're going to win the Sun Belt title, and I'm going to be the biggest fan cheering them on. So I think it's one of those that, taking those losses to App State and Marshall, I will be very curious to see how much they use that just kind of going into the season, because I wouldn't even necessarily say it was defense related why they lost. Obviously not having Ray Scott and Jacob Dobbs hurts your defense, but I think some of it too was just kind of the offense running into trouble late and play calling maybe not being there at the right time. But it's definitely one that I think toward the end of the year, just injuries more than anything, I think slowed them down quite a bit.
Right. You all played UNC last year, which was by far one of the craziest games that I've ever seen. It was more of a basketball game as far as the score, 70-50, and y'all won. Looking at your all's out-of-conference schedule this year, you've got Louisville in week 2, and then you've got Washington State on the back end of this of the schedule. Louisville's on the road. You got Washington State at home. Do either of those games stand out to you? Maybe as hard to win as far as coming off the bowl win last year. I guess the Louisville game would kind of stick out, right? Because that's probably going to set the trend on how y'all are going to start the season off.
Yeah, I would say out of those two specifically, the Louisville one is maybe the one that's a little bit more concerning just because it's early in the season. And I do think with Washington State, there will be a bit of a benefit that it's a home game for JMU and they don't have to make that cross-country trip. So the Louisville one is the one that I think is going to be maybe a little bit iffy at times, and because they played them a few years ago too, and it did not necessarily go in JMU's favor then either. I think you're going to have some JMU fans and some JMU players that are going to want them to kind of get the momentum in that game because they're going to have Liberty right around the corner as well.
Yep.
And that is a game that's been long awaited between the two schools who do not have a lot of love for one another, fan-wise especially. So I think JMU fans are going to want to see this team get some momentum against Louisville to hopefully propel them into some good results in the weeks following.
Yeah, you looking at the schedule, if they can get the win on the road, that's a tough task anywhere. But if you can get the win on the road versus Louisville, man, that has to really be a huge motivator and just really set your team and the theme up for success the rest of the year. Because then, like you said, you got Liberty, Georgia State, or Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Louisiana La Follette, Old Dominion, Texas State, Marshall, App, and then, like I said, you got Washington State at the back end with Coastal Carolina. But I really think if you can get the win at Louisville, that's going to go a long, long way for what this team does the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you said with the UNC game last year, that game has kind of, for me at least, changed my opinion on kind of these mismatch of, G5 to P4 matchups because, I didn't necessarily know what JMU was going to do against UNC last year, especially with kind of the offensive struggles they had early on. And then, the first quarter happens and the second quarter of that game happens. And at halftime, I walked by the guy who calls games on the radio for JMU, and we both looked at each other and just like laughed and shook our head and kept walking because it was just like one of those of, what are we watching? Like, this is an ACC program, and that's obviously 2 straight years for JMU at that point to get a win over an ACC program. So now you're looking at it where I think JMU does have a little bit more of a belief that they can walk into these schools that are supposed to be the bigger and better ones and get the win, or at least make things interesting to where, if a team makes a mistake late, JMU can be there to capitalize on it.
Right. I don't think anybody had on their bingo card having you guys score 70 points versus UNC.
No.
So looking at your all schedule again, before we let you go, what is your projection for this team? Where do you think they finish in the conference? What do you think their record overall is? And I'll let you go from there.
I really do think that if they're not playing in the Sun Belt Championship game, it could be viewed as a little bit of a disappointment.
Right.
The coaches have gone out and they have gotten really, really talented players to where there's not a lot of holes on this team, and there's a lot of depth that can step in and play right away. So I think that it's fair to say that there should be an expectation that they're playing in the Sun Belt title game and potentially winning it, and then having a chance to represent the Group of 5 in the college football playoff. So in a way, I don't think it's necessarily ridiculous to say 10-2 is a good expectation for them. There are some games obviously here and there that they may not be able to win. I think there's a benefit this year of getting Georgia Southern and Harrisonburg. That definitely hurt them being in Statesboro last year. That's a place that they continuously struggle in. They have App State and Harrisonburg as well. Marshall, they have to go to, but it's a different Marshall than it was last year with Charles Huff leaving and all of that. So I think it's definitely going to be an interesting one, but I think 10-2 is a reasonable expectation for this team, which is maybe a little bit wild to say just because it's, 2 losses is hard to get through a season with just 2 drops.
Yeah, and I don't think that's too crazy at